So a lot's been going on about this idea of SARS-CoV-2, the virus responsible for COVID, being the result of a lab leak instead of a zoonotic transfer. For the longest time, if you even suggested this, you'd have your videos and tweets, censored and kicked off of social media, and, Fauci kept yelling at Rand Paul because he kept asking about it. Well, the tune's kind of changing, not in any definitive way. There's things that say, okay, now we've got more reason to believe it was lab leak. Now there's less, now there's more, now there's less. And so this is not really the latest. It's a couple weeks old. I've been on vacation, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But I think it's an important part of this, where you have newly declassified government sources saying that the first people who got COVID-19 were people who worked at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I know I'm not pronouncing that right. I can't pronounce Chinese. I mispronounce names. Y'all are used to it by now. Get over it. So this is on Public, which is Michael Schellenberger's Substack. And he writes this with Matt Taibbi and Alex Gutentag. I think Matt Taibbi wrote the actual article, but it's all three of them together doing the reporting. Yes, these are scientists at the Wuhan lab that were engaged in gain-of-function research on SARS-like coronaviruses when they got sick. And that's a problem if you work at a virology lab and there's the leak isn't like, like you see in the movies. It's just someone at the lab. There wasn't good containment. And they got sick. And then they walked out and they gave it to others. And then those people gave it to others. So it looks like these three might have been the first one. So. And getting started on after years of official pronouncements to the contrary, significant new evidence has emerged that strengthens the case that the SARS-CoV-2 virus accidentally escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. According to multiple U.S. government officials interviewed as a part of a lengthy investigation by Public and Racket. Racket is Matt Taibbi's outfit, and Public is Michael Schellenberger's, like I said. The first people infected by the virus, Patients 0, included Ben Hu, a researcher who led the gain-of-function research on SARS-like coronaviruses, which increases the infectiousness of viruses. The technical term is actually index patient instead of patient 0, and so you have patients 0, which is, yeah, that doesn't really make any sense numerically, but patient 0, just as an aside, it was a misunderstanding by the press. I forget which disease it was, but they were studying the first patient in California to get it, whose last name began with O. And just for the sake of anonymity, the reporters just put it down as patient O. That's what the scientists, the doctors were using it. They referred to him as patient O. Well, the press looked at that, misinterpreted it as patient 0 instead of O, a numeral 0 instead of a capital O, and it went from there. The proper term is index patient, so if this is correct, these are the 3 index patients for SARS-CoV-2. Public officials in the U.S. and other countries have repeatedly suggested that uncovering the pandemic's origin may not be possible. We may never know, said Anthony Fauci, the former director who oversaw pandemic response for 2 administrations. Well, maybe we would if you hadn't spent 2 years insulting and deriding and putting down and insisting about the censorship of everyone who even asked the question. Because that's what he was saying for the longest time. No, this is a conspiracy. It's a zoonotic transfer. Shut up, Rand Paul. You're an idiot. I am the science and all that. Now, earlier this year, he's kind of changed his tune a little, and he's saying, well, we may never know. Well, maybe if we had investigated when Rand Paul wanted to, maybe we would. Now, answers increasingly look within reach. Sources within the U.S. government say that 3 of the earliest people to have become infected with SARS-CoV-2 were Ben Hu, Yu Ping, and Yan Zhu. I know I'm messing up those names. Get over it. All were members of the Wuhan lab suspected to have leaked the pandemic virus. As such, not only do we know there were WIV scientists who developed COVID-19-like illnesses in November 2019, but also that they were working with the closest relatives of SARS-CoV-2 and inserting gain-of-function features unique to it. When the source was asked how certain they were that these were the identities of the 3 scientists who developed symptoms, we were told 100%. Now, I'm not going to go over the people themselves all that much. As usual, you can read this. But it's really more about the bigger story is about how we just haven't even been able to get an investigation into this. Why? Why have we not even been allowed to ask the question? So, sources tell Public and Racket that other news organizations are chasing aspects of this story. On Saturday, the Times of London quoted an anonymous U.S. State Department investigator saying, "It has become increasingly clear that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was involved in the creation, promulgation, and cover-up of the COVID-19 pandemic." And there's more previously classified material to be released. I'm not caught up on all of that, so just understand that disclaimer, but it seems to be there's just a revelation that pulls it one direction, then another revelation that pulls it another direction. We just need a proper investigation. December 2017, 2 years before the pandemic began, Chinese state-run television aired a video of Ben Hu watching a lab worker handle specimen. Neither are wearing protective gear. That's just one of the things you do when you handle specimens. Same video shows scientists hunting for bat viruses with little protective gear. And Chan says if they were worried about being infected in the field, they would need full body suits with no gaps. That's the only way. The WIV research with live SARS-like viruses was performed at 2 lowest safety level. BSL-2, which is the technical name for it, when we now know that the pandemic virus is even capable of escaping from a BSL-3 lab and infecting fully vaccinated young lab workers. While scientists justify such research as necessary for developing vaccines, President Barack Obama banned federal funding for gain of research in 2014 because experts had come to the consensus that it was too dangerous. I've talked about this before. This has gone back half a century. There are some who basically want every single virology lab in the world closed down. Yeah, and then there are others who are like, no, this is important. We need to understand this. So that's the that's the controversy within the field that we're looking at here. So Barack Obama had shut down the gain of function part of it. However, the National Institute of Health and NIAID, headed by Francis Collins and Fauci, and a major U.S. government, had to do an edit there, I'm back now, and a major U.S. government grantee, EcoHealth Alliance, we've heard about all these people, deemed their work on SARS-like viruses as not falling under the gain-of-function research of concern definitions and funded this project in China and Southeast Asia. And that's what we're seeing. They're just kind of redefining it. Okay, this might be about viruses gaining function and research showing that, but it's not gain-of-function research. So yeah, they're playing around with definitions. Very Orwellian. In March 2018, the WIV, the EcoHealth Alliance, and the University of North Carolina applied for a $14 million grant from the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, to engineer furin cleavage sites into SARS-like coronaviruses to study how this affected their ability to grow and cause disease. Sorry, I gotta edit again. Okay, I'm back. Hopefully that won't keep happening, but... Okay, furin cleavage sites, we've talked about these. These are things that are going on in your body the whole time where you make the protein by making an amino acid chain that's a little bit too long, and then the furin cleavage site says where to cut it off to make it into the proper protein. There's been a lot of talk about this with SARS-CoV-2 and how it makes the spike protein and how it sets up the furin cleavage site so that your body cuts it off at just the right place. And so the question is, how could that have evolved naturally during the time frame we're talking about? There are scientists who are skeptical about that. Scientists say the key piece of the COVID-19 virus, which made it so transmissible compared to its closest relatives, was its unique furin cleavage site. DARPA rejected the grant, but it now appears the WIV went forward with the research anyway. The Times of London reported that U.S. collaborators of the WIV had come forward and said the Wuhan scientists had put furin cleavage sites into SARS-like viruses in 2019. And so who has co-authored multiple papers on coronavirus research? I'm really tempted to make a joke there. Who co-authored multiple papers? That's right. So tell me, who did it? Yes. So who was it? Right. So the papers were published by who? Well, am I asking me for? Who's on first, etc. All right, including a 2017 paper on chimeric bat coronaviruses with Peter Daszak. We know that name, don't we? The head of EcoHealth Alliance. Data privately shared with the NIH revealed that these chimeric SARS-like viruses grew far more quickly and caused more severe disease in humanized mice in the lab. When the WIV put out their first paper about the pandemic virus, they failed to point out the novel furin cleavage site despite having had plans to and allegedly putting such gain-of-function features into SARS-like viruses in their lab. And Chan says, it's as if these scientists propose putting horns on horses, but when a unicorn shows up in their city a year later, they write a paper describing every part of it, except its horn. Public sent emails and made phone calls to the NIH, WIV, EcoHealth, Daszak, Hu, and Xi over the last several days and did not hear back. It is unclear who in the U.S. government had access to the intelligence about the sick WIV workers, how long they had it, and, above all, why was it not shared with the public? And Chen says, you would expect the country of origin to be defensive, that's China, and we saw how China was playing damage control after that. But you wouldn't expect a country receiving the virus to be withholding key evidence. Unless that country is the United States of America. Sadly. Alright, January 15, 2021, 5 days before Biden took office, the State Department published a fact sheet that pointed to the likelihood of a lab leak as the cause of the pandemic. Oh man, do you remember this? All the people who screeched racism over this. Yeah. Already, the State Department in 2021 suspected that the WIV had lied to the public. The U.S. government has reason to believe that several researchers inside the WIV became sick in autumn 2019 before the first identified case of the outbreak, with symptoms consistent with both COVID-19 and common seasonal illnesses. That raises questions about the credibility of WIV senior researcher Xi Zhengli's public claim that there was zero infection among the WIV staff and students by SARS-CoV-2 or SARS-related viruses. In February of this year, this is when things start changing, the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, not a conspiracy theorist, not Joe Rogan, Christopher Wray, told a reporter that the FBI has, for quite some time now, assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident in Wuhan. This is Chan again. Ever since I put out my May 2020 preprint research paper saying that an accidental lab origin was possible, I was criticized as a conspiracy theorist. If this info had been made public in May of 2020, I doubt many in the scientific community and the media would have spent the last 3 years raving about a raccoon dog or a pangolin in a wet market. Maybe we could have been putting pressure on China to say, look, guys, you gotta tell us what was going on there. This is kind of important. Politicians, scientists, journalists, and amateur researchers for years now have zeroed in on the possibility that COVID-19 may have resulted from U.S. gain-of-function research conducted in China. Publications ranging from the Washington Post to The Intercept to the Wall Street Journal have uncovered suggestive details, including the NIH awarded funding for at least 18 gain-of-function research projects between 2012 and 2020, and the NIH scientists in 2016 expressing concern about supposedly paused hybrid chimera virus research. Had the information come out earlier, this is the big takeaway here, governments may have responded to the pandemic differently. After public shared the information with Chan, she said, "I feel vindicated, but I'm frustrated. If you knew that this was likely a lab-enhanced pathogen, there are so many things you could have done differently. This whole pandemic could have been reshaped." I mean, like, for example, how long did it take to come up with a vaccine? Well, if you knew it came from this lab, you're like, okay, we need to know which one it came out. Give that to us. We'll make the vaccine based on that. And they could have had it a lot sooner. Instead, what happened. And what was the result? I told you at the time, you get more anti-vaxxers, and guess what? You got more anti-vaxxers. One of them was running for president. So Metzel said, had U.S. government officials, including Dr. Fauci, stated from day one that a COVID-19 research-related origin was a very real possibility and made clear that we had little idea what viruses were being held at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, what work was being done there, and who was doing that work, our national and global conversations would have been dramatically different. The time has come for a full accounting. Of course, don't expect it. These are politicians and politically connected people. They're not going to be accountable for anything. The scientists aren't going to be accountable. Fauci's not going to be accountable. They put us through all that crap for years. And, the truth has always been out there. It was just a matter of investigating it to see it. But instead of doing that, the government cut it off at the knees. And that's something that everyone involved in that needs to be accountable for. And it's really important. Because this is going to happen again. It's not a question of if, but when. Pandemics happen. I'll say it again. Our whole response to COVID was absolutely freaking ridiculous. They were acting like this is like a unique threat in the history of humanity. No, we're just spoiled because for most of us it hasn't happened in our lifetime. But, there's still people alive today who went through the measles pandemic, in the 50s. Of course, you had Spanish flu. At the time of our founders, I pointed this out before, this was happening every 5 to 10 years. They'd have another epidemic or pandemic blow through. And yet they still wrote in the First Amendment about our right to peaceably assemble. Yeah, this would have been very much on their mind at the time. and yet they considered it no exception. Because they knew that first of all, they knew it was not going to work. That was pretty much all the lockdowns and everything. We've known they don't work. We've known they don't work for centuries. And it proved it again. 1918 proved it again. The cities that locked down did terribly and the virus blew through. But, in another example of censorship, you have that whole Barrington Declaration, which was just the scientific consensus, which is you protect the vulnerable, quarantine the sick, and let everyone else live their lives. That's how we'd learned to do it. And that's what we know works. And that was a big conspiracy theory and letting the virus run wild and you want to kill grandma. From the very same people who lied to us about this. They had information that this was a lot more likely than they were letting on. What are you going to do? Are you going to listen to those same people over again? Or are you going to listen to the real science? Not only the scientific consensus, but the mere concept of science, which says that as soon as someone comes out and says, I am the science, they're no longer doing science. As soon as you try to censor other hypotheses and ideas and theories and everything else, calling it disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, conspiracy theories, and everything else. As soon as you do that, you stop doing science. Because science is the antithesis of authoritarianism. The more authoritarian you're being, the less you're doing science. And that's just all there is to it. And if we only learn one lesson from COVID, let it be that. Thank you so very much for watching. Comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell, and go to donate.pagosity.tv to keep me doing what I do, especially by becoming a regular subscriber, getting these videos early and ad-free. Thanks so very much. It's great to be back from vacation, getting back into this again. Might be a little rusty, as you can tell, but I'm getting back into it. Thank you so very much. Until next time, stay strong and be free.